My name is Seren Adler. I am 31 years old. And 3 weeks ago, I walked into a room full of people who were supposed to be my family and discovered that almost nothing I had believed about my own life was true. I want to tell you this story carefully. Not because it is complicated. The facts are actually very simple, but because the details matter, and I spent too many years in this family having details dismissed to tell this one carelessly. I work as a paralegal at an estate planning firm. I have been there for 6 years. I know how trust documents work. I know how beneficiary designations function, how conservatorship proceedings are initiated, how family members with financial motives can use legal architecture to accomplish things that would otherwise require a direct confrontation they do not want to have. I know these things professionally, which is the only reason I recognized what was happening to me before it was too late. My father, the man I had always called my father, is named Howard. My mother is named Denise. My brother, 3 years younger and constitutionally allergic to effort, is named Bryce. For most of my childhood and all of my adult life, the family dynamic was simple. Bryce was the beloved one, and I was the useful one. Bryce failed upward through school on charm and was consistently rewarded for it. I earned everything I had: grades, opportunities, the slow, careful accumulation of professional credibility, and was consistently met with a nod and a subject change. I did not grow up angry about this. I grew up confused, which is worse, because confusion makes you try harder instead of walking away. I kept thinking that if I was steady enough, reliable enough, successful enough, the gap between how they treated us would close. It never did. But I kept showing up, kept sending money when they needed it, kept being the one who answered the phone when the situation required someone capable of actually solving something. The money is relevant. Over 8 years, I had transferred somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 to my parents in increments, covering the gap when Howard's business had a bad quarter, helping with Denise's medical bills the year she had the back surgery, a few thousand for Bryce's equipment when his online venture required investment for the 3rd time. I did all of this without keeping formal records, because I thought that was what family was: the informal, unaccounted exchange of support between people who loved each other. I understand now that I was the only one operating under that assumption. My grandfather on Howard's side was named Gerald. He was 81 years old, in declining but stable health, and the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. He had built a moderate but real estate fortune over 50 years of careful work, and the family had been aware for some time that the question of the estate was approaching. Gerald had never discussed its specifics with anyone that I knew of. He was private in the way of people who have watched money change family relationships and chosen caution as a result. 3 months before the meeting, my brother called me. Bryce only called when he was excited or when he needed something, and his calls tended to combine both. He told me Gerald was calling a formal estate meeting. Everyone was invited: aunts, cousins, the family attorney. He told me Howard had asked for my birth certificate the previous month for records purposes, and that I should bring whatever documentation I had. The birth certificate request is the thing I should have sat with longer than I did. My parents had always been vague about my birth certificate. Denise said the original had been lost in a move when I was small. I had a certified copy from the county office, which I had provided whenever anything required it, and the repeated requests for it had never struck me as significant. It struck me now, combined with Bryce's particular excitement, the way he spoke about the meeting with the tone of someone waiting for something he already knew was coming, as a thread worth pulling. I pulled it. I searched the county records archives for the address my parents had lived at when I was born. I searched for any event that might explain a document loss. Nothing matched. There was no flood, no fire, no reported damage in that area in the relevant year. The story Denise had always told had no foundation. I closed the laptop and sat with that for a long time. I thought about the birth certificate requests. I thought about Bryce's excitement. I thought about Howard asking last month for documentation he already had a copy of. I thought about what I knew professionally about how people prepare for legal proceedings they expect to be contested. I thought, someone is building something, and I am the subject of it. I did not confront anyone. I work in estate planning. I know that the correct response when you suspect a legal action is being prepared against you is not to warn the people preparing it. The correct response is to prepare your own position quietly and wait to see the shape of what they have built. I spent the 3 weeks before the meeting doing exactly that. The day of the meeting, I drove to Gerald's house in the outer suburbs on a clear Thursday morning. The driveway was full. Cars I recognized, cars I didn't. I parked at the end of the stone path and walked to the front door, which was open. The study at the back of the house had been arranged around a long table. Approximately 40 relatives were present, aunts and cousins and people I recognized from holiday gatherings over the years, all seated or standing, all looking at me as I entered with the specific quality of attention that people give to someone they know is about to receive news. No one smiled. No one said hello. Gerald sat at the head of the table with his cane resting against his chair. He gave me a small nod when I came in. His knuckles were white on the cane. The family attorney, a man named Philip Crane, sat to his right with a briefcase open and a notepad on the table. Howard stood up when I reached the table. He did not greet me. He slid a thick folder across the polished wood toward me and said, "This is the proof." I looked at the folder. I did not touch it. He opened it himself and pulled out a document, a DNA lab report, stamped and signed. He told me it was conclusive. He told me I had been adopted. He told me they had raised me, fed me, clothed me, and educated me, and that they wanted compensation for the costs incurred, itemized in the folder at just under $400,000, or they wanted me to sign away any claim to Gerald's estate. He said if I refused, he knew people at my firm and could make a call that would end the promotion I had been working toward. I looked at the folder. I looked at Howard. I looked at the room full of relatives who were watching me receive this information, with expressions that ranged from uncomfortable to actively curious, none of which resembled sympathy. Then my brother picked up my phone and wallet from the table in front of me. He had reached across while I was looking at Howard and started live streaming. Bryce had been running a streaming channel for years with modest success. He narrated into the camera with the practiced affect of someone who had spent too long performing for strangers. Here it is, guys, the moment, look at her face, can you believe this? I looked at him holding my phone above his head with my whole life visible on the screen and felt, beneath the shock of the moment, something shift into a very cold and functional clarity. I said, I'm not signing anything. Howard's expression tightened. He repeated the figure. He repeated the threat about my firm. He said there were witnesses present. I said, I can see that. I turned to Philip Crane. I asked him whether demanding financial repayment from an adult adoptee as a condition of inheritance access was legally enforceable. He looked at his notepad briefly and said this was a private family matter. I said, that's not an answer to my question. A sound came from the back of the room. Not a voice, a single pair of hands clapping. Deliberate, measured, 3 slow claps and then silence. A woman I did not recognize stood up. She was perhaps 60 years old, well-dressed in the understated way of someone who did not need to perform competence. She walked forward from the back of the room to the edge of the table and said her name was Catherine Marsh. She said she had been invited by Philip Crane as an independent witness to the trust proceedings. Howard looked at her with an expression I did not understand. Gerald's head came up. His mouth opened slightly. He said her name in a way that was not quite a question, as if he recognized it and had hoped not to hear it today. Catherine set a slim folder on the table. She said she had been my mother's attorney. She said my mother, before we continue the story, I just want to share something from my heart. Writing these stories has become more than just a hobby for me. It's something I truly enjoy and spend a lot of time creating for you all. Recently, I was looking through my channel analytics, and I noticed that many people who watch my videos don't usually leave a like or comment. I've never really been the type to ask for it, but the truth is, every like, comment, and subscribe helps these stories reach more people. It tells YouTube that this video is worth sharing, and that support genuinely helps this channel grow. So if you're enjoying the story so far, I'd really appreciate it if you take a second to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe. Your support means more than you know, and it helps me continue bringing more stories like this to life. Now, let's continue the story. My mother's name was Miriam. She said Miriam had died of an illness when I was 18 months old, and that before she died, she had established a trust for me. She said the trust had been funded monthly for 28 years. Payments made to Howard and Denise Harris in exchange for raising me with the condition that the arrangement remain private until I turned 31. She placed the first document on the table: wire transfer records, monthly payments, 28 years of them, totaling more than the amount Howard had cited as what I owed him for being raised. Howard's face went the color of old paper. Denise, who had been standing near the wall, gripped the edge of the table. Bryce lowered the phone slightly. I could see the live viewer count reflected in his eyes as he looked between Catherine and the camera, recalibrating in real time. Catherine placed the second document, the original trust agreement signed by all parties. Gerald's name was on the signature line. Gerald's shoulders dropped. He stared at the document without speaking. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man watching something he had known was coming and had found no way to stop. Catherine placed the third item, a single sheet of paper, handwritten, in an ink that had faded slightly at the edges but remained completely legible. She said my mother had written it for me before she died. She said she had been asked to hold it until today. I picked it up. It said, "My dear Seren, if you are reading this, I am not there with you, and I am sorry for that more than I can say. You were never a problem to be managed. You were never unwanted. From the moment I understood you existed, you were the thing I was most certain of. Your father is a good man. He was not ready, and I was not brave enough to fight for what we could have been. That is my failure, not his and not yours. I asked him to wait, to give you time to arrive at this on your own terms. I hope you can forgive the waiting. I love you. I have always loved you." I held the letter against my chest for a moment. The room was completely quiet. Even Bryce had stopped narrating. Catherine said, "Her father is present today," and she looked toward the door. A man came in from the hallway. He was perhaps 65, gray-haired, with the careful posture of someone who had been waiting a long time to be somewhere and was trying not to show how much it mattered. His name was Edward. He looked at me the way you look at someone you have been thinking about for 31 years, with recognition and grief and something close to relief all arriving at the same moment. He said, "I have waited a long time for this. I am sorry for how long it took." He placed the final document on the table, a DNA comparison, his sample and mine, conclusive. An aunt near the back of the room, one of Denise's sisters, a woman named Rosalie who had always been quietly uncomfortable at family gatherings in a way I had never understood, stood up. Her voice shook when she spoke. She said she had kept records. She said Denise had asked her to destroy certain documents 20 years ago, and she had not been able to do it. She said she had stayed quiet because Denise had leverage over her own mistakes, and she was ashamed of that silence, but she could not keep it any longer. Howard looked at Rosalie with an expression that had moved past anger into something simpler and more final. Denise said her name once, sharply. Rosalie sat back down and did not retract what she had said. Bryce was looking at the phone screen. His face had changed. He said, "There's an email here from the firm. It says the trust agreement expires today on her birthday. Dad, it says today." Howard reached for the phone. Bryce pulled it back. The live count was in the hundreds. The comments were moving faster than anyone could read them. Gerald finally spoke. His voice was very thin. He said to Edward, "We had an agreement." Edward looked at him for a moment. He said, "Yes, you were supposed to take care of her." Gerald closed his eyes. He bowed his head. He did not argue. I looked at the folder Howard had slid across the table. I looked at the itemized costs of my childhood, calculated and formatted as a demand. I looked at the room full of people who had watched this happen without objecting. I picked up my phone from where Bryce had set it down. He had lowered it when the letter appeared and had not raised it again, and I walked out. The door closed behind me. I sat in my car for a few minutes without starting it. The letter was still in my hand. I read it once more, slowly, in the quiet of the car. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket. I drove home. Over the following weeks, I learned what had happened to the rest of them the way you learn things about people you have decided to stop watching closely, in fragments. Through second-hand accounts, with decreasing interest. Howard and Denise's marriage did not survive the discovery of what the other had known and not disclosed. The finances were worse than anyone had understood. The trust payments had been absorbed into a household that spent beyond its means for 3 decades, and the accounting of where the money had gone became the accounting of everything. They sold the house. They separated. Neither of them contacted me. Bryce's channel took the damage you would expect when several hundred live viewers watch you livestream your sister being ambushed at a family meeting and then discover that you knew what was coming. He deleted the footage. He deleted the channel. I heard through Rosalie that he had started over on a different platform posting content about personal growth and intentional living, which I found more sad than funny but slightly funny. I did not reach out to Gerald. He called once from the hospital a few weeks later. A health episode, nothing fatal, but the kind of thing that prompts people to make calls they have been avoiding. I let it ring. I have not decided yet whether that will be permanent. He was not the architect of what was done to me, but he knew enough to know something was wrong, and he stayed at the head of the table with his cane and his white knuckles and his silence. That cost something. I have not finished deciding how much. I met Edward at a coffee shop in the city about a month after the meeting. Somewhere ordinary, mismatched chairs, good light, the kind of place where nothing is performed. He was already there when I arrived. He stood up when he saw me, and then he waited to see what I would do. I sat down. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about my mother, about how they had met, about what she was like, about the 2 years she spent sick and the decisions she made in those 2 years on my behalf. He showed me photographs I had never seen. A woman laughing in a park. A woman holding a baby, me, though I did not recognize myself, with an expression of complete absorption. I cried once briefly, and he waited without saying anything, which was exactly right. At the end of the meeting, I told him I was not ready to call him anything yet. I told him I wanted to keep meeting. He said, "However long you need, I will be here." We have met every few weeks since then. The same coffee shop. No pressure, no performance. Just the slow, careful work of 2 people learning whether they can trust each other, which is the only honest way to build anything. The promotion came through. My manager called it straightforward, the most qualified candidate, no complications. I moved into a new apartment that month, smaller than I needed and exactly the right size. I unpacked my things over a weekend and stood in the middle of the living room when I was done and felt something I had been waiting for my whole life without knowing I was waiting for it. Quiet. Not the quiet of absence, but the quiet of a space that belongs entirely to you, where no one else's needs are pressing in from the edges, where you can hear yourself think without the ambient noise of people who are always calculating something. My mother's letter is on my desk. I look at it most mornings. I look at the photograph Edward gave me of her laughing in the park. I see myself in her face in the way that you sometimes see something true about yourself for the first time from the outside. She said, "Live with courage, be kind, be strong." I am trying. The people who used me are no longer in my life. That is not a tragedy. I have Rosalie, who told the truth when it cost her something to do it. I have Edward, who waited 31 years because my mother asked him to and is still waiting, patiently, for whatever I am able to give. I have colleagues who respect the work. I have a desk with a photograph on it and a letter from a woman who loved me before I was old enough to know I was loved. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything that matters. Family is not the room you are born into. It is not the people who raised you or the blood they claim to share with you or the documents they hold over your head in a room full of silent witnesses. Family is the people who tell the truth when lying would be easier. The people who wait without conditions. The people who look at you across a coffee shop table and let you set the pace. I am learning what that feels like for the first time. It feels like solid ground. There is one thing I have not talked about yet because I needed to arrive at it in order. It is the part about what it felt like to be inside that room, not the facts of what happened, but the physical experience of standing there. What I remember most clearly is my grandfather's hands. Gerald's knuckles were white on the cane from the moment I sat down. He was gripping it the way you grip something when staying still is costing you. When Howard slid the folder across the table, Gerald's eyes went to the tabletop and stayed there. He was not surprised by what Howard was doing. He was ashamed of it. There is a difference, and it matters, and I sat close enough to see it clearly on his face. I have thought about what that means for him, to have sat at the head of his own table, with his name on a trust document being weaponized against the granddaughter he watched grow up, and to have chosen silence. Complicated positions still require choices. His was to grip the cane and look at the wood grain. I am not ready to forgive that. I am also not certain I never will be. That uncertainty is honest, and I am trying to be honest about everything now. Whatever was taken from me in terms of story and origin, and the feeling of belonging to people who chose you, the life I built in spite of all that is entirely mine. It was built in the gaps they left. In the years they were not paying attention, which were most of the years. No one gave me those things. No one can take them. I think my mother knew I would build something real. I think that is what she meant when she wrote, "Live with courage, be strong." She was not telling me how to be. She was telling me what she already saw. I am trying to see it the same way.